It's time for an Outlaws of Thunder Junction set review. Yeehaw! There's only one problem. I don't want to do a set review. I want to do crime. Committing a crime is a new mechanic in Outlaws of Thunder Junction that refers to targeting an opponent, anything they control, and or cards in their graveyard. All of that is a crime. And there are a few cards in this expansion that look cEDH playable to me, dependent upon how easy it is to commit crimes and how often we can be doing it. The cards that stand out to me are Magda the Hordemaster, Freestrider Lookout, and Servant of the Stinger. Marchesa, Dealer of Death, would be a commander and not something that fits in the 99, and so not really what we're looking to talk about in this video. So, Freestrider Lookout and Servant of the Stinger sort of represent the two ends of the spectrum for me, with Freestrider Lookout wanting to commit crimes constantly, everybody's turn, so that you can use the lands on your own turn, and Servant of the Stinger only cares about committing crimes on our own turn prior to the combat step. So let's start with Freestrider Lookout. In order to be happy with this card, we need to be committing crimes as often as possible, as cheap as possible. We really can't be expending resources into this, otherwise it's really not worth running a card like this. So let's take a look at the top 30 or so commanders in cEDH and see how often just the commanders can commit crimes. What a bunch of fucking Boy Scouts. Using my usual filter criteria for cEDH events to look at the top 30 commanders, only 4 of them even have the capacity within them to commit a crime. Of those 4, only 2 of them are green. Kenrith, the Returned King, which can commit a crime by putting a +1/+1 counter on something your opponents control, and Daravi, who can tap or untap target permanent, but cannot really do it on other players' turns, and so isn't really going to help us with Freestrider Lookout. But that's okay, we don't necessarily need the commander to do it. We can take a look at the main decks to see how often we can commit crimes. Do these decks know that these aren't real crimes? The police aren't going to show up at your... I don't want to talk about Freestrider Lookout anymore. I want to talk about Servant of the Stinger. Because this seems generically like one of the best things that you can be doing for one of the committed crime cards. It's obviously Demonic Tutor. Everybody loves Demonic Tutor. That's what we want to be doing. So, all these decks play Demonic Tutor. Surely we can find a way to fit in Stinger of the Servant if committing a crime is easy. So let's just take a look again at some of the popular decks in cEDH and see how easy it is to commit a crime on our own turn before we get to damage. Really, really hard. I don't want to overgeneralize here, but most black decks are 3 or more colors, with the majority of them being blue and black because Thoracle Consultation. It makes sense, it's a very popular combo, it's a very popular color combination. In decks like that, 3-color black and blue decks, 4-color black and blue decks, 5-color black and blue decks, only about 15 or so cards within them generally can commit a crime. The only creature that you're really running into is Orcish Bowmaster, which if it's already in play, it's not really up to you whether or not you get to commit a crime with that card. It's up to other players to draw. And then about 10 or so of those crime committers are counterspells, which you can't really force in your own main phase unless you're already going for a win attempt. But if you're trying to kick off a win attempt, then why are we trying to attack with this Stinger? What is it even searching for if we're already going for a win attempt and forcing counterspells out of our opponent, or just things out of our opponents that we can interact with in order to counterspell? Chain of Vapor almost kind of feels like we can't count it as a way to commit a crime for Stinger, because I have to imagine that if you Chain of Vapor something with Stinger of the Servant in play, that player is just going to copy the Chain of Vapor onto your Stinger of the Servant because it doesn't have haste. It's going to have to, make another whole table cycle. Sure, there are some proactive removal choices that you have to proc the commit a crime ability, get this Stinger through, and then sack it to a Demonic Tutor. But for the amount of hoops that you have to jump through, you might as well just be running Grim Tutor. It's only 1 more mana, and you don't have to go through all of this tomfoolery and pretend like this Stinger is a good card just so that you can get off another Demonic Tutor. Now, I didn't know that cEDH was so full of nice people who were looking to never wrong each other in any way, shape, or form outside of countering each other's spells. It really just goes to show you that I'm convinced that before Wizards of the Coast could officially release Magda's lore, it had to be reviewed by the United Nations, because this is a terror cell disguised as a mono-red deck. While your average blue-black deck has about 15 or so cards that can interact and be considered crimes, most of them being counterspells, Magda on the low end is coming in at roughly 32 crime committers, with 25 plus of them being able to be done at instant speed. And we're talking across creatures, instant sorceries, enchantments, artifacts, lands, and not just channel lands, but lands that are in play. Things like Shink of the Bloodsoaked Keep just says 2 mana, give something first strike, and guess what? That's a crime if you do it to something your opponent controls, and that's going to make you a tapped treasure off of new Magda. That's right, what a surprise. Magda the Crime Queen wants to be the one committing crimes, just this time in Thunder Junction. And so the ability to trade mana for tapped treasures, love that for Magda. It's why they play something like Treasure Vault. A couple of these are not quite as useful. A couple of the dwarves have to like sacrifice themselves in order to randomly give something +1/+0 or +0/+1, which in a pinch, if you need to get from 4 treasures to 5 treasures, sure, you can do that. And that's good enough for Magda. They run a lot of really sort of questionable dwarves just because they're dwarves, and so it is nice that you now have one that can trade sort of these more useless dwarves or randomly tap a couple of mana in order to get you over that hump, on top of the fact that Magda has always just been one of the most removal heavy decks in the format. They run so many things that targets your opponent's creatures in the instant and sorcery slots. So, typical red decks committing crimes. While Magda is the queen of crimes, there is something that is a little bit more criminal, and that is Spellkite. I don't know what this thing is made of, but whatever it is was stolen. For those of you that aren't aware, Spellkite has an odd ruling that makes it the unmatched criminal mastermind, which is you can activate Spellkite's ability even if Spellkite isn't a legal target for the target spell or ability, or even if that spell or ability has no targets. In that case, no targets are changed. Some of the more modern players might be familiar with this. Apparently this used to be something that you would do in Death Shadow in order to get your life total pretty low. But what this means for cEDH is that anytime your opponent puts a spell or ability on the stack during any player's turn, you can pay 2 life to target that spell or ability. I don't care if it's a fetch land, I don't care if it's an opposition agent. If it uses the stack, you can pay 2 life with Spellkite to target it. And that makes it the ideal crime committer. Unfortunately, it's just not enough to make these cards worth running. Ultimately, I don't expect to see any of these crime cards making waves in cEDH. There's so many hoops that you have to jump through, except for Magda in Magda. But yeah, let me know what kind of crime you like to do. In-game, of course.